Hey, everybody, and thanks so much for being here. We're back at it with the State of the Black Church conversation. This time we're talking about generations. So go ahead and tag 737 people. And don't forget to share this. Call your mama, your grandmama, your cousin, Pookie, everybody you can think of. And don't forget to call your pastor because I think it's going to be a great conversation. I am most excited to talk about some of our findings that we probably didn't expect to see. The best thing you can do in survey design when you're designing a research project is to try to be as exhaustive as possible. The worst thing you can do is attempt to create a survey or a research project that's going to tell you all the things you thought you knew. And so we found out a lot of things we thought we knew may not have been true. And a lot of things we were sure we would see we probably didn't see. And I'll tell you while we wait for you to come on in, one of the things that I was certain we needed to put in this project and we absolutely could not do without was gentrification. I mean, Black churches are definitely in jeopardy right now because of gentrification. And we understand that while gentrification feels good in the moment because you have a Starbucks down the street or because Target is in your neighborhood, in a decade or two, you probably don't have a community that will really support your church. So at that point, you have to find probably a white church that can afford your building or a white church plant who's looking for some space. And I think we just have so many things around gentrification. But we put this in the study and we put it in. We found out no generation cared about gentrification. So while I was a little disappointed because I wasted a good amount of space in the survey to make sure this is in, what we learned was that it is extremely important for us to educate our congregations on gentrification. It is true that boomers won't feel the impact the same, but for emerging generations like millennials and Generation Z, it's important that they know that Starbucks that's now easy to get is probably a signal that they won't have their community in the next 2 decades. So we're really excited to have some conversations about some things we've seen among generations. So if you've tagged your friends, if you called your pastor, if you've done all those things, then I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to begin the conversation with two pastors who I know we all know. We love their work. We support their work. We're excited about what they're doing. We try to see what they're going to do next. And so I'm going to have them introduce themselves, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I brought them in. I brought in Dr. Watson because Dr. Watson has been doing life stage ministry for an extended period of time. That's actually something that we don't get to see many times in Black churches. And life stage ministry, based on what we're looking at in the data, is the future of the Black church. It's really the future of the church. But because I'm not really concerned with the church at whole when we're talking about research, I want to emphasize that Black churches who will thrive in the next decade or two, we probably don't have as long as 2 to really get this right. We'll do that because of life stage ministry, and we'll talk about why. I brought in YPJ for a number of reasons. Pastor YPJ has gone through transition and succession, which is really important when we talk about generations. And so we'll be able to talk to him about what it means to grow up in a church, what it means to pastor people of different generations. And because if you look at him, while he is the preacher heartthrob for young women, people of all generations are really concerned with his ministry. They're on time. He's doing things that I'm not sure we really get to see young pastors do often, like wake up very early in the morning for prayer and expect that younger generations are going to meet you there at 5 o'clock in the morning. So we have a lot to learn. Dr. Watson, if you could introduce yourself, we'd appreciate it.
Well, Dr. Bree, it's good to be on with you and Pastor YPJ as a part of this experience. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Of course, my name is Lance Watson. I serve the St. Paul's Baptist Church. I've been there for 35 years in Richmond, Virginia. It'll be 36 if the Lord let me live to see October. And I've had the opportunity to lead every size church because I came to about 100 people in attendance, and as of the end of last year, we were trying to minister to 11,856 people spread across several locations. And so I've had the opportunity to lead in a variety of situations, and I'm grateful to be here to talk about this. I think it's an important subject.
Thanks. I'm super glad to have you. Pastor YPJ, will you introduce yourself to the I'm not even gonna clown. Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
First of all, let me say in 2010, I was on tour with Fred Hammond, and playing some music, and we stopped by the Right Reverend Dr. Lance Watson's church. And I said to myself, who is this man? What has he got on his life? I want it. And it's just amazing what the Lord has done. But I'm honored to be here. I'm Pastor YPJ, Senior Pastor of Faith Alive Ministries in South Bend, Indiana, which most people only know my city for Notre Dame University. And we barely won a game the other day. But I'm very, very excited, Bree. I believe that what you're offering right now in these conversations is not only unique, but very necessary, as Dr. Watson stated. So I'm excited to have this conversation.
Great. So thank you guys both for being here. We're going to start with just a little bit of background. So I am CEO of Black Millennial Cafe. We are data and research resource really for people. We were birthed out of a deficit. We've been in a data deficit in Black churches and communities for a very long time. And all I wanted to do was do my little DMIN project, which I did not want to do research. I only wanted to do a curriculum for Black young adults. And because you have to work in your context, I had to find data on young adults. And so like Vashawn Mitchell searched all over, couldn't find no research. I had to make a decision at that point. Am I going to go to Barner and Pew and ask them to do this for us? Or am I going to do what I think God calls us to sometimes? Sometimes God calls us to nothingness so that we can create nothingness or chaos. And we're supposed to create out of that. So I took that as my responsibility. I called a friend of mine who was an experimental psychologist, took some classes, worked with her. She supervised our research. After that, I realized we had a real issue because I didn't know when the next research project would come out, when the next study would come out. So that's actually how we started. People wanted me to facilitate trainings and lecture, and then they asked me to consult, and I didn't even know what it was. And so I'm like, sure, I'll consult. Tell me what that means. And so that's really how we were birthed. And from that, we decided we would go ahead and become a legitimate company and create research, still with my best friend as our lead research consultant. Of course, I've learned more along the way, and we operate with 4 researchers. So we have an analyst, a designer, we have a data journalist, and we have like a, I guess, what do you call it? Pinch hit in sports, like somebody who comes in when we need them to. And so we're really excited about the work we're doing. And when I met David Kinnaman, who is Barna's president, we both had the same desire. We wanted to do a study on the Black church. Barna had to deal with some reputation and relationship issues, and Black Millennial Cafe had to deal with some financial issues because it costs about $300,000 to $400,000 to do this work. I was fortunate enough to be able to have a conversation with about 7 Black church pastors who supported the work so that we could bring almost $100,000 to the table, which changed once the pandemic happened. But I will never forget. And let me say this, they didn't back out. I backed them out of it because I didn't want Black churches to be on the line for that kind of money in the middle of a pandemic. So we made a call to another funder, but I will never forget the fact that I could make a phone call to Black church pastors who were willing to say immediately they would give more than $10,000 to see this work done. And that is something that is new to the Black church. So thank you so much to our supporters. If you buy the monograph, we're going to put the link in the chat. It's Trends in the Black Church. The monograph is where you see all the data that we're publishing on this study. And so you'll get to see a thank you in there to them. I served as the lead researcher for this project. It kept me up in the middle of the night. I definitely shed a few tears because we had been in a data deficit for 21 years without extensive qualitative or quantitative research on the Black church, which means we are working just like in the dark, really. While white churches are probably getting data every year to 2 years, just updating what they know about their churches, how to use their resources best. And so we're grateful for this data. I'll be honest, it'll be around for the next 10 years before someone comes along to redo this study. And it'll probably be me. But we are trying to make sure we continue to do new research time and time again. So you'll get to see at the end of the year, we've created another partnership so that we can make sure we extend the data that we have. We also have data that you're more than welcome to come to our website and check out. Like we have data on Black millennials and faith, urban gun violence, Black churches and civic engagement. And we have a partnership with the Black Church PAC. So we're always doing new surveys for them so that we can understand where Black church people are on civic engagement and politics. Now, to get into this, because I know you guys did not come here to hear about that, but I thought it was important anyway. We're going to start with the first comment that will become a question. When we did this research, the 2 generations who shocked us most were boomers and Generation Z. I must admit to the pastors that I continued to write in the margins of my work, who pissed off boomers. Like, that's the best way I could say it. I didn't know another way to say it. Like, I just kept putting in the margin, like, what did we do to them? Why are you holding them hostage? They don't want to be here. So we got to see that boomers were most disappointed in the church. When we looked at where boomers were, they were disappointed in the lack of progress. And they were disappointed in the leadership, or they really scored pretty low in the authority of the Black pastor in the community compared to Generation Z. Does this surprise either one of you that boomers may not be the happiest generation in the church like people assume they are?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. Because by the time you have lived as long as they have lived, you've taken off your rose-colored glasses and you've seen reality as it is. So you don't have the same, I won't call it illusions, dreams and visions, you know, as younger people do, but you've seen it as it is. And so disappointment is a natural part of it. And I say that as a boomer.
Yeah.
That one of the issues that I have struggled with, I shared with my ministerial staff. I said, the thing that I struggle with at this point in my life is cynicism.
Yeah. Because
I remember being a young pastor, Pastor YPJ, being a young pastor and being very optimistic and hopeful and bright-eyed about what could happen. And years pass, you know, and a lot of great things have happened, and I don't want to discount any of them. I think a lot of significant things have happened. A lot of things happened that we did not anticipate. Like, we did not anticipate the encroachment of what I'll call all-out prosperity theology, prosperity at the expense of everything else, not as an integral part of building the community as a whole, because prosperity has a place. Right. But when you make anything, everything becomes nothing. Oh, that's good right there.
It is
good. but we didn't anticipate that. In the Black church and in the Black community, and the role that it would have in perpetuating what was already there, the negative that was already there. So it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
That either one of those are where they are, you know, because I would hope that young people are always bright-eyed and optimistic, that they are always believing that our generation is, and it's interesting that every young generation is the Joshua generation until they become Moses. You know, it's kind of like that commercial on how not to become your mama and how not to become your daddy. You know, all of us start out, I ain't gonna be them, you know, and then over time you look and sound, you know, more like them. So
yeah.
Yeah, disappointment definitely dims the lights. It really, really does. And I appreciate Dr. Watson being honest about the cynicism that takes place at a certain age. As a younger pastor, because I inherited so many members from my parents, I made sure that I was very intentional in doing my very best to fulfill any promise that was made, or make sure that the progress that was expected in times past would continue forward, because I did notice that they were very skeptical. They wanted to see, are you really going to do what you said you were going to do? So I'm not surprised that there's a greater measure of disappointment from the boomers concerning the current state of the church. A lot of them saw the church at its height. They saw the churches when they were in, you know, really healthy places. And then, as Dr. Watson so eloquently stated, the prosperity movement was so individualized that we didn't see the actual benefit of prosperity hitting the church and how it could directly affect the community. Everything became about my blessing, my season, you know, God's got something for me. And we looked at prosperity as an opportunity to splurge and not serve. And so that was a disappointing thing when it began to wear out and fade out, and things were a little bit more difficult. So I'm not surprised, but I do believe that if we can have a greater demonstration of consistency from leadership, especially my generation, and make it less about our own, you know, our own ministries, names, and popularity, we can reestablish that confidence with the boomers.
Yeah. I've noticed Black churches do something that I don't know that I see, especially Black mega churches do something I'm not sure I see in other churches. And that is exercise a level of humility about your progress. I think we're willing to boast about some things, right? Like the number of people in church, but we forget to show the progress and the missions that we do and the work we're doing in our community. We are actually pretty humble in areas we probably need to brag on, because people do not know how you've progressed and what you've done and the successes you made and the victories you've had if you don't remind them. We have a very short memory. I remember working the campaign last year, which I probably get flashbacks. That's probably gonna make me sweat when I even think about working the campaign last year. But when I remember, we kept saying we have a short memory. We have a short memory. We kept having to bring things that we were all just up in arms about over the 4 years. We would have to bring them up 4 weeks before, 3 weeks before, 2 weeks before, because people have a short memory and they have a longer memory of your failures.
Right.
A short memory of your successes. And so one thing I always encourage Black churches to do is make sure you're increasing your PR around the work that you're doing. I think we all had the joke before about churches who would have the same amount in their building fund for 3 years and still raising the building fund. We're going to get a new building and it would happen 73 years later, maybe. That was kind of, I think, an era that we went through, along with the No More Sheets era for women, Woman Thou Art Loose era for women. And I think when we think about those times, that was maybe a place that would impact Generation X, because they watched their parents go through this, and then they watched economic recession, and they watched the same prosperity ministry they were excited about maybe not come through for them in harder economic times. We have to honestly say that during prosperity times, there was also just a natural boom in the country that felt prosperous. And when that changed, Generation X and some millennials had to watch their parents walk through not being able to name and claim everything they'd done in a season where they were prospering.
Yeah, can I say something to that about the conference era? It served in a duality. It was almost a simultaneous thing that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
There were those that were genuinely teaching the word of faith that was benefiting their congregations and developing their character, their ideas. But because it was so prosperous, there were those that gravitated to it in a popular stance, like, oh, I'm going to teach that because it's working for them. So then you had the name it, claim it, grab it, and blab it that started, and it was wrapped around sensationalism and not principles. Because if I teach you financial principles, not only biblical, but just in an economic setting where you're learning how to balance a checkbook and you learn how to manage money, then you'll begin to prosper. But if you're just telling people, by the time you get home, God said everything's going to turn. It's exciting, but then the disappointment comes when you shouted your voice out and nothing has shifted. You churched and nothing has changed. So I think the conference era was kind of like, it wasn't all bad, but there was bad that came from it. And that was the conflict was, because it was a major era. A conflict was, you had those that saw the benefit, but I think there were more that saw the burden of it. And it is a conversation that we need to have. We need to discuss how sexually chaotic things became, because even though No More Sheets was transparent, that time frame, preachers started becoming irresponsible, and they were just saying anything for shock value. And then, of course, social media came in, and the soundbite kicked in, and everything changed. So that's a dynamic thought, Reverend Bree. We need to, think about it in the days ahead. Let's talk about the conference era. What did it do good?
Yeah.
What damage did it leave?
Yeah. And what it does to children. You know what I mean? Like, parents at this point are trying it. Children are just watching it. And that makes them decide whether they're going to try the next thing. I also have to shout out Lance Watson Jr. because he is here with us every month, and we're actually disappointed if he's not in the chat. So thank you so much for being here. If you didn't come today, I was going to totally reach out and tell you that was trifling, but we're glad to see you here to support us again and your dad. So good to see you. What misconceptions have you seen as far as generations? Like when you look at your local church, and you think about all the things you hear at conferences, what's the greatest misconception you think you've heard about generations altogether? One specific or generations altogether?
Go right here.
Well, for me, Dr. Watson, I think there's just been so many misconceptions based on stereotypes. There's this thought that all the older boomers are bitter and that they're all just like the church needs to. And then there's this thought with the millennials that they're all a bunch of rebellious radicals that don't have any money. I don't know where they got that idea from. They don't have no money, and the money comes from the older church. It don't come from the younger. I'm like, what? You got that twisted. It's them with the $600 Yeezys on their feet. They got money, but there's been so many.
Okay, you don't have to call out specifics. Okay, don't do this. I'm just saying.
I know I forgot how you feel, but there's a lot of misconceptions for a lack of conversation. I personally have been forced to have conversations because I passed. Some people say they pastor multi-generational. I legitimately do. And it is not all because of me. Again, I inherited a very healthy church. I didn't take over a church of a dying pastor who didn't want to give up the reins and the church was in chaos. My parents are still alive, healthy, and well. My dad knew it was time to transition. And so he's riding his motorcycle now and enjoying life. But I had to learn how to take on the responsibility of pastoring a generation that I had not earned their trust yet. So I've had to have the conversations, which is Reverend Bree said something off air that helped me to really even speak to the misconceptions that take place. Our church blew up because of popularity. We had my social media ministry became so popular that in the community we had a strong ministry, but people started coming from everywhere, and we didn't understand data. We didn't understand how to maintain that measure of growth. I will never lie and be like, yeah, we had a system in place. We didn't. We had a system in place, but it was prepared for what we were accustomed to. So that when rapid growth came, we had to backtrack and say, okay, how do we maintain what we've obtained? And therefore conversations broke out. And that's when I began to see we have a lot of misconceptions about one another and a lot of misinterpretations on feelings, and everybody's not against everybody. So I think a lot of it has to do with a lack of communication, just from what I've experienced, a lack of communication. And of course, the power of social media and the statements that a person with a big platform can make when they say things like, everybody's your hater and you got to be, and it's like, no, it's not everybody. You're individualizing your personal experiences and making it very toxic for the mass. So just poor communication is what I've noticed has been a hindrance.
Yeah.
We took a difficult turn right at the beginning of the pandemic to reorganize our staff as it had been previously organized, because when we went multi-site, we began to build around locations, but that's not how we had originally started out. We originally started out with life stages where we took the whole church and broke it down into 10-year segments. And so you belong to a different life stage as you transition from one decade to the next. There's some science behind this. I don't have the kind of research you do, Bree, but there's some science behind it, because if you think about your own life, you were different at 15 than you were at 10, different at 20 than you were at 15, different at 25 than you were at 20. So every 5 years or so, human beings just naturally kind of go through this state of flux. And as we move, in 10-year increments, it's even greater. So we organize the church in the life stages, and then I assume the role of, if the church is a hospital, let me use that metaphor, I would be a general practitioner. And my life stage pastors are specialists.
Yeah.
So I have like full-time pastors over each life stage with the intent and idea that somebody should be able to tell us all things 20-year-olds. Mm-hmm. Somebody should be able to tell us all things 30-year-olds. And what has happened, the synergy on the team as we built it, has caused us now to have conversations about how we transition people from one life stage to the next. What kind of intentional intergenerational dialogue do we create from one generation to the next, so that you have 70-year-olds who are engaged in reading to 8-year-olds, in a very intentional way, where we're documenting it and measuring it so that we're having conversations, for example, about marriage. And the LJ is on tonight, and he leads a Bible study for 30-year-olds called Pursuit. And it was interesting. He was sharing with me that they wanted older boomers to come on and talk about marriage and how in the world did you stay together all that time, given
Yeah.
given a number of factors. One, just two people, being together that long, but then how do you keep interest in each other over decades, and all of that. So there's a lot of conversation that needs to take place about life in general, about the church in particular. Because I think if I said it in a binary way, in terms of young and old, that the greatest misconception I perceive among young people is that you don't need the church. The greatest misperception among old people is that the church is going to last forever. And both of those are misconceptions,
Absolutely.
and they're based on assumptions that are not valid.
Yeah, I totally agree. Whenever you guys find some boomers to tell us anything about marriage, how you do it, and if it's worth it, please call me so I can know. But I think
look, I am and have been happily married to the same woman for 44 years.
I can't even imagine.
Wait, we got married right out of high school, and we put each other through college, then put our kids through college, and we're still together. At this point in our life, the things we talked about across the dinner table as teenagers dating about how we wanted to live is the life that we're living. So
I just want to say that the Prophet Andre 3000 was talking about you when he said, "Thank God for mom and dad for staying true together, because we don't know how." But that's awesome, Pastor White.
It really is. It really is. So I'm hoping for some kind of marriage conversation from the two of you, or something, like teach us, at least maybe not marriage. Can you teach me just about basic relationships or something? Like, I just need some help. No, I really think that's an issue. And when we looked at data in our early work, that was something that came up. Like a lot of people just didn't get to see a healthy relationship. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know what to expect. They're not even sure, they've heard whispers and rumors, of someone who was married 44 years, but they've never actually been able to touch someone who's been married 44 years. It is really difficult for people to find that type of relationship that is, they've grown together through all the life stages. I think that's amazing. Pastor YPJ, you mentioned this whole thing about money and millennials. Please don't call us out for wearing Yeezys. Okay, no, just kidding. This is the thing. Whenever I hear people talk about money and how seniors are the ones with the money, I tell them that seniors at that point are an easy mark, and that's exploitation. When we're talking about seniors who are on fixed income and you make your entire budget rest upon their finances, that's just irresponsible at that point. Younger generations, emerging generations are actually the ones with the money, right? They can still get increases and promotions. It's just that it takes training and teaching. And boomers didn't start off just giving just because they just believed in it. Elders didn't start off they had to try God. They had to have teaching. They had to learn and test God and believe that they could actually give and God would be faithful. And I think we really missed the mark when we just skipped over a generation who wears Louboutins and Yeezys and specialized Jordans and think that, we'll never get anything. Now, I have to tell you this. Our research did say for millennials, you can't expect the widow's mite. It's just not going to happen. Black millennials believe the more they have, the more they should give. And so if the church needs a roof and a millennial needs a roof, both of y'all got to hustle to get a roof. Literally, they're not going to pay for your roof when they have their own issues, but they do believe at a certain level of financial security, they believe they have the responsibility to give and to support the church. We're going to go ahead and take a break for one quick second. Don't go anywhere, but tag your friend. We'll be back in less than 30 seconds. finally made it. It's Dr. Akeem Walker. So good to see you. I know you had some church responsibilities, but we're glad you got here. We're really talking about, of course, generations. And right now we're talking about the misconception of generation. What's the biggest misconception you've seen in ministry? And well, I guess you should introduce yourself because you work today in a number of different contexts to tell us about this. So can you tell us a little bit about your multiple contexts before you talk about misconception of generations? We can't hear you, man of God.
See, that's one of the misnomers, right? That the millennials know everything about technology, right? Good evening to everyone. So my name is Akeem Walker. I reside in Virginia, where I pastor in the rural part of North Carolina, in a Hosky, North Carolina, a little town called Powersville, North Carolina, but simultaneously serving as an associate pastor at Six Mount Zion Baptist Temple in Hampton and on staff at Grove Baptist Church in Portsmouth, Virginia. And from time to time, Reverend Dr. Brianna Parker thinks that she's my boss. And so, YPJ, you understand, right? I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that the two generations cannot exist. Real quickly, I've never forget my first Sunday at the church that I started. When I started at the church I'm privileged to pastor 9 years ago, the sermonic selection was "If God Were Dead." I didn't even know that a hymn existed, YPJ. If God Were Dead. Now, Dr. Watson, you might know that hymn, but it was foreign to me. And I literally had to get up and go in the office, Bree, and listen to Donnie McClurkin, like to get because I can't get up and preach after. It's my first Sunday. I got If God Were Dead, like what am I going to do with it? And all of the young people were in the back of the church, zoned out. Mm-hmm. That was on the first Sunday. The third Sunday, no, that was the third Sunday. The first Sunday, when all the young people were up jamming, the mothers of the church and the deacons were like, "Y'all going to hell, hurry up."
Hurry up
and sing because y'all going to hell with this music because we don't do this bopping and stuff. And I literally saw two generations fighting indirectly. And I am the bridge because I went to my church, I was 27. So I'm old enough to be the big brother to the kids and young enough to be the son to the deacons. The youngest deacon at the time was 67.
Wow.
And I remember at a church meeting, and it had to be the Holy Spirit, and maybe me talking to breathe through this, right? I don't know. I'm gonna give the Holy Spirit credit, not.
Okay, let me be number two then. Okay.
And so one of the things that I instituted was that when the children sung or the youth sung, they had to at least do a hymn. Mm-hmm. And when the senior choir sung, you can sing all the hymns you want, but give me something that we can clap our hands to. Mm-hmm. And that really started the bridge. What I saw 9 years ago, that now, the generations kind of work together. But that's one of the biggest issues, that the two don't work together. But the Bible says they call the young because they're strong and the old because they're wise. And so how do we merge that gap?
Yeah. I think, we also have to say that this whole beef of generations, this is one thing, right? Music, I'm sure this always happens, and in time, right? When generations are transitioning, which I appreciate Dr. Watson talking about transitioning, because I don't know if you guys remember, children don't always want to go to youth church. Sometimes they're excited to go to youth church. Sometimes they're very hesitant. It's like going from middle school to high school. You know what I mean? And youth church, they don't always want to go to, like young adult ministry. So that transition is serious because sometimes you have to leave some of your cohort behind. You have to go into the unknown. It's time for you to promote or graduate. And we're not always ready for those stages. I want us to remember, you're always going to have communication problems like with generations. Yeah, you have to work on how you communicate. But this beef among generations does not really belong to Black people and Black churches. It's really Western. It's something that, honestly, the media told us it existed. Books were sociologists told us it existed. And Black people sometimes just take on the country's issues as our own when they really don't belong to us. Black people have grown up with three generations in the household forever. I mean, we know what it's like to have our grandmother there, or, you know what I mean, to raise your great niece's child. And so some of the beef among generations, I'm not sure quite belongs to us. What I am sure belongs to us is the responsibility for of intergenerational work and communication. What have you guys seen, or what do you do in your church to promote intergenerational work?
I want to say that Dr. Kim is spot on when it comes to music. One thing that has united our church is intentionality with music and conversation about it. We sing hymns every week. Now, we don't sing God is Dead. I don't think I've heard that word, Reverend. I don't think that one's going to make the cut ever. But we sing hymns every week intentionally, and we talk through them. It isn't a situation where we just sing them. I'll tell the younger generation. I remember my grandmother would sing this, and some of you mothers, you remember, we make it an episode, we make it an event, and then we make everybody sing it. So the young people are singing these hymns, but at the same time, our worship culture is intentional about diversifying because music is relatable. So we're not always trying to find a hit. We want to please God, but we've discovered that music is a commonality, and it's a language that if you just minister to certain areas, people become more comfortable. With my older saints, as long as they don't feel forgotten, they're fine. They've seen the consistency of the ministry. We make sure that we cater to them. I give my parents all the credit in the world. They're the ones that established a healthy culture. My dad is a bold man of integrity, and he had a whole statement. I will take your struggle, but not your mess. We don't do mess in this church. And so we kept that going. But now we see a camaraderie because there's lines that we're starting to notice that really were unnecessary, as you said, battles that weren't ours. So we pushed them out the door. And I find that the community is getting stronger. Do we always agree? No. But we recognize that compliance doesn't always require agreement if you trust leadership. If you really believe that we've heard from God and that in times past we've proven ourselves consistent and trustworthy, then they roll with us for the most part. But music has helped us a great deal, and continual conversations. We make the floor available. What's on your heart? What's your thoughts? Now, if you come to me with something that's dumb, I'm going to have to rebuttal you to ensure that you understand there's a reason why we do what we do. And then, you do it in love. At least I think it is. And then from there, we go forward. So that's what we've been able to utilize just on the surface that helps us to keep everybody close.
Yeah.
Ours is very, very similar in terms of engaging in conversations, using music, using a variety of cultural elements to help people connect, to help them understand. I'm thinking now that speaking of boomers, right? We do every summer what is called life stage summers. And so each weekend we celebrate a different life stage. Sometimes we start with the children and work our way to the seniors. Sometimes we start with the seniors and work our way to the children. And so whatever life stage is up, we highlight them on that weekend. All the actors, all the players. We'll talk about the challenges that people face in that particular life stage. And there are commonalities because with our life stages, we organize around fundamentally the same principles. Because every life stage is organized around groups, events, care, volunteer, outreach, communications, and worship. So all of the life stages, even the children's life stage, have those elements. And the reason I did it that way is that helps with the transition. That if what you're going to has some similarity to what you came out of, it's easier to know how to plug into it, even though there'll be variations on the theme. And I'll give a perfect example of that following our homecoming last year, my challenge to the life stage pastors was to do like Facebook, right? And I want you to do a Facebook Live, and we're going to do 7 days of prayer on Facebook Live, and we're going to engage people in Facebook groups. Well, LJ, who is on tonight, was one of the immediately rebuttals because his demographic ain't into Facebook. They were on the Instagram, and the younger group was on TikTok, but Facebook was cool with me. I mean, for the demographic that I was going, I'm like, I'm good. I know how to use this tool, and it requires a certain degree of cultural fluidity.
Yeah.
On all of our parts to be able to appreciate and value what each generation brings to the equation so that we can be able to adapt to it. This is, if I can regress for a moment, because you hit upon one of my favorite subjects, and one of my favorite subjects is money.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that I like talking about money. And
which is very rare to hear, seriously, which is very rare to hear pastors say, because most times they want to like shy away from money conversations.
Oh,
I love it too.
no. It's in the Bible. It's in the Bible.
Yes.
Money answers all things. Prayer may move heaven, but money move earth. Let there be no doubt about that. Okay. You know, and the reason I'm so big on this issue, and we're talking in the context of the Black church, but it applies to Black institutions in general, is that after the Civil Rights Bill was signed, for now 4 or 5 decades, until very, very recently, the Black community wandered in the wilderness looking for the next Moses, because we didn't know what the next step in the journey was. And the next step in our journey as a community of people in this particular American context is economic equity, economic equality, economic parity. We admire people with money, not because they are necessarily admirable, but money gives you options. In a society that is built on the idea of freedom, those who have resources have more options. Those who lack resources lack options. This was the fundamental deficit of those who took prosperity to an extreme. It was the deficit of, run down here and put $100 on the altar, and in 3 days you're gonna have a turnaround, And then when they didn't get the turnaround, you get the bitterness. The evangelist is gone who told them, but the pastor's there holding the bag, right?
Yeah.
And people looking at you, well, you brought him up in here, and he told me this and I did this, and there ain't nothing to happen for me, and so we couldn't blame them. And I believe that one of the fundamental myths I would love to see Black pastors and the Black church come to grips with is this: that we can only rise economically as a community. And the lie that we've been sold, and that we are sold again and again, and we have sponsors who are selected and lifted up before us, you can be like this person. And the lie behind that is you can do it individually. You don't need anybody else. If you look across the panorama of American society, communities rise as a whole. And I won't even name them. They rise as a whole. If you look at the long-term, longitudinal, and we're talking about research, trajectory of Black people, everything significant for us that has happened historically happened as a result of organized networks. The Underground Railroad was a network. The Civil Rights Movement was a network. Why would we think that economic equality, parity, and equity would be any different? That you can't do it as an individual. You can get income, but you can never build wealth, because wealth is a long-term proposition, and it's a communal proposition. Okay, good. I'm glad you let me get on that soapbox, because I was just carrying that like a baby that was ready to be born.
Oh, listen, we're happy that you shared it. We really are. I think one thing that we need to realize for all generations is nobody gets to do this alone. No one gets to do it alone. I think we take for granted, right, the responsibility of seniors to hold up the church. Or we look at churches who have like real financial stability, and we think it's come from one generation, and it's come from understanding that things happen collectively. I am, still pretty young. And I called my pastor when I went to go redo my will, I think 2 weeks ago, to see who the church would go to. If my mother is deceased and my father's deceased, my house is going to my church. My kids, my niece and nephew who I've raised because my sister's deceased, they'll be okay. I have other things for them because I have more than one property. But I wanted to make sure that my church, who does collective good, I think I have a phenomenal church, Antioch. My pastor is Carrie D. Wesley. My new pastor is Chris Wesley, who is my baby brother and pastor, who is his son. And he's just doing such amazing work. I just always want him to know how much I believe in him and what I'm doing to make sure my church is going to be secure and financially upheld. And I share it with other people, so people my age know that they can put systems into place to make sure they believe in the longevity of the ministry. I think we really forget that we have a responsibility at every age and every stage to support the work and to create something for everybody. When we talk about generational appreciation, one thing that we got to see in this study was leadership mattered. When we looked at what mattered in churches, leadership of the pastor was number one. Everyone was surprised to see this. But if you remember, we've been in a 4-year deficit of leadership. This is why the numbers look the way they did among generations. For elders and boomers, this was a spot of, like poor leadership. For millennials and Gen Z, it's almost their life of, their entire political life or life of civic engagement is 4 years of it for someone who just voted. That's huge. And so when you've been in a leadership deficit, you really appreciate the leadership of the pastor in ways that maybe someone else who just sees it as a spot of 40 years of voting won't see it. How do you believe your leadership impacts multiple generations? What is it about your leadership, or how does your leadership impact multiple generations? Your leadership style, possibly.
Well, I can identify with Pastor YPJ because, and with Dr. Hakeem, when I came to St. Paul's, I was 24. And so for the majority of people, they saw me as a son or as a grandson. There were a few young people there who saw me as a brother. There was virtually nobody there, who saw me as anything other than those things. So I had a benefit, however, that I am the 15th of 17 children. So I learned how to get along with large groups of people who were older than me and younger than me and negotiate my way. I learned that very early. Because you get tired of being beat down, so you learn how to negotiate. I learned how to talk, and I put that to use when I came to the church, that I related to the older people as though I was their son or their grandson. I related to the younger people as though I was their older brother, and to my peers as if I was one of their siblings. And I think at all of those levels, I had the opportunity to exert leadership. But I want to add this as a 35-year person. I think leadership is a renewable commodity, which means you never get to the place where you are a leader. It's like health. It is something you are constantly pursuing. And the moment you decline its disciplines, your capacity begins to diminish.
I appreciate that. I've been listening to this podcast. Russell St. Bernard, I told him he owes me hours of my life back because I just can't let it go. It's on, I think it's Who Killed Mars Hill, and it talks about Mark Driscoll and all the leadership issues he had, and like how this kind of creeps in, you know what I mean? And the same thing they fired him over, or whatever you want to call it, he resigned over, were the same things that people championed. They liked it, they loved it, and then it was too much and it never stopped. Then it got worse, kind of thing. So tell me this, Dr. Watson, so your capacity to lead can be diminished. Can you gain it back? Can you?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
It's leadership credibility is a hard creditor, meaning that once you declare bankruptcy, it's really hard to get your credit rating back. It's not impossible. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. I thought about, as you were speaking about the whole Mars Hill experience and what's to be learned from there. Dr. Gardner C. Taylor told me this, and I owe it to you to pass it on.
Okay.
This is what he said to me on the campus of Union Seminary here in Virginia. He was doing the Sprunt lectures, and I had the opportunity as a young pastor to be his armor bearer.
Oh yeah, that's the chief.
We didn't call it that then, but I had the opportunity to drive him around. And this is what he said to me. He said, young man, you have a bright light. You are a bright light. He said, your challenge is going to be managing your shadow. He said, because every bright light has a long shadow. And it's not your light that's going to get you in trouble. It's your boy. In my best Andre Crouch voice, and the church said amen, right? You know, you got to manage your shadow. And everybody has one. And to the degree that we are authentic and transparent and honest about that and bring it into the light of our faith experience, we can manage it. But, you know, secrets are cancer to the soul. And there's a statement, you're only as sick as your secrets. I don't know if you've ever heard that. You're only as sick as your secrets, you know. So the idea is you have to tend your dark side. You have to tend your proclivities, your inclinations, your influences to keep it from overwhelming the bright light and potentiality that has been placed in your life. And God will send you help. I mean, I don't mean to wax that way, but God will send you help. He'll send people who have gifts of discernment and who are able to say to you the right thing at the right time in the right way if you're available, for it, particularly as a leader. You know, so I think you gain in with every good decision, with every wise move, with every compassionate deed, you gain leadership credibility. And the other side is true too, that there are things you can do to lose leadership credibility. I also think that there's something to be said with regard to if you stay in a position for a long time, the crowd changes. You remember this text that says, and there arose a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. That was a nice way of saying the crowd changed. Okay. So Joseph was a leader in one slice of history, but then the crowd changed and he didn't have the same leadership influence with the next generation. And I think that that's indicative of any leader, that to the degree that we are able to stay relevant, have some degree of cultural fluidity while maintaining our ethical integrity, that we can continue to lead from one generation to the next. But when we become rigid or irresponsible with the influence that's been given to us, we can lose it in the same way.
It's like masterclass. I don't even know what to do, Dr. Watson.
I'm like, Dr. Lance Watson is such a gift and a jewel. Like, no, like you took me back. I remember we rode in the van together. This was 2013, when you did the Word Network for Jamal Bryant, and just the wisdom is still like, let me to Dr. Bree though, we're talking about generation discussions. I think, because you said something that was powerful, that it's not ours as a Black church. I think part of the generation battles that happen in church happen amongst clergy that spills over into congregations, right? Because we do not have oftentimes these kind of conversations. And I'm not just saying it's a brownie points. I mean, you, my sister, ride or die, but I think there are oftentimes you have a group of millennial preachers that's talking about what the old heads don't understand and what they're doing. And then you have Dr. Watson's age and older talking about what the young preachers are doing too much. And we don't have these kind of conversations together to figure out how do we navigate, because the church, it takes both generations. I mean, from all
Wait, no,
standpoints.
multiple, because we don't want to.
Multiple, I mean, yeah, let me say multiple generations working together. And so I echo what Dr. Watson said, that here's the challenge, and YPJ may can do a better job with this than I can. That we have one generation in a church, multiple generations, but the older generation is saying, manage your shadow. Be the young pastor. We want to brag. We got a young pastor, whether male or female, that can preach, because we want all the energy that comes with that. But when you finish preaching, manage your shadow. Then we got another generation that's saying, what's behind the curtain? Is the wizard just a man?
Right.
So I think the tension that lies is how much is too much in a reality TV world, but yet for the generation that still needs to sanctify the leader in the eyes of the people. And I think that's the tension for most younger clergy, is that we don't know. That line is very thin between managing your shadow and then showing it to a generation that lives in a reality TV world.
Yeah, I have to think about the whole process too. People like to skip processes. We don't really like those steps, and missing steps usually missed opportunities for growth, right? To really have some type of integrity that's forming, that your character, those character changes. I think we have to remember that. And so many times I think we see Dr. Watson and we take some notes about everything that's happening, and we feel like we can just create it like a stage play. But we forget all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes if we're not having these conversations that allows us to hear, it doesn't happen overnight, that you can lose and you can win. You know what I mean? You can gain some things and you can lose some things. It doesn't mean it's over. That managing your shadow probably starts really early. I tell people, if you can't do it in a room alone, you can't do it with the crowd. It is hard to catch up. Integrity, character, leadership. It's hard to catch up once everybody knows you. Those are things that you want to form when no one is watching, or when there are just few people watching, as opposed to waiting until as soon as they used to have this saying, I'm going to follow up in something like Dr. Watson has, and then I'm going to learn all the things I need to know. You never follow up into something like that. When we looked at the data, though, we got to see our first study, Black Millennials and Faith, showed us that trust in the pastor and money went hand in hand. If they trusted the pastor, they assumed that the money was okay. If they didn't trust the pastor, they assumed that the pastor was stealing the money. I mean, it was just based completely on how much they trusted the pastor. We also got to learn in mega churches, there was an automatic trust that would come to churches pastors who pastored larger churches. And they thought the best of their pastor until the pastor showed them something different. They started at 100, and then you had to lose it. Smaller churches, you seem to start at 0 and you have to gain it. It's something weird that happens. When we looked at this newest study that was done in the middle of the pandemic, which we actually thought was a horrible idea. Look at God. We didn't realize the pandemic would last so long that this would be the state of our world right now for an extended period of time. When we looked at the data, we got to see approach to money was the outsider's biggest issue with the church. Here's the issue with that. We haven't had national scandal in a couple decades now. When we did see national scandal, it was white televangelists. But when you look at who people trust least, it's Black pastors. And it's really because of the tropes and the parodies we see in things like First Sunday and any other thing. As soon as a Black pastor comes on the scene, he's going to be a jackleg. It's rarely going to be a woman, except when you're watching The Pink. What's the name of the actual show? You know what I'm talking about on Star? The Pink is what they call it. Huh?
Greenleaf, right?
No. Remember, it's a strip club called The Pink. Y'all know.
I don't watch those kind of things.
P-Valley.
P-Valley. Thank you very much, Dr.
He's 35 years in. He can watch that stuff and get away with it. Me and YPJ like, huh? What?
They knew exactly what it was.
I actually read it in the comments. The producer put it out there.
And look, and of course, Dr. Fisher knows because it's supposed to be based on like Memphis, I think. No, they say Mississippi, but I think it was it's actually taped in Memphis. So when we're talking about the Pank, the woman on there is actually the pastor who's a crook. She steals from her daughter. Usually when we see it on Friday, he's trying to get some 20, yeah, and then you know how it goes. We get to see all these tropes that says you can't trust the black pastor, and it's usually around money. But we really haven't had any legitimate national money scandals. Well, what do we do to change that narrative if we can't impact the media or Hollywood? How do we gain trust among generations when it comes to pastors and money? Because it is the number one issue for outsiders. That means the people who have chosen not to come to your church, who are skeptical, the first issue they have is approach to money, even though they've probably never been in your four walls to see how you handle money, what you do with money, to even know anything about your budget. That's their number one issue before they walk through the door, because that's what they see on their television and on movie screens.
Yeah, for me, I think a lot of pastors have to stop trying to gain the trust of the world and first gain the trust of their congregation. From there, it expands to the community. Mm-hmm. Our church, we made sure that the church people, the members, those that invest in what we do, have tangible evidence of where the resource is going. They're seeing it. We don't just talk about mind, body, and soul. Our ministry, I'm so proud of our ministry and that what God has done through us. We're getting ready to open up a 24-hour fitness facility right in the plaza that our church owns, because we're pushing for the inner city to have a state-of-the-art facility where they can go work out. We can't just teach you to be spiritually healthy and encourage you to keep eating pound cake. You need to go to the gym, get some exercise. Dr. Watson, your analogy was phenomenal about leadership, how when you don't work out your physical body, it begins to deteriorate. And it's the same way with leadership. So we thought that necessary. But when the community sees that, they're like, oh, they're putting the money forward. You said it, Dr. Bree. A lot of times we don't celebrate the works that we do. But when Haiti had the earthquake, we immediately told our church, we're going to take resource from something that we were going to put forward in a personal project, remove it from there and send it to Haiti. They champion that. They celebrate that. They Facebook that. They post that. And then the community hears about it and says, okay, whereas there may be, quote unquote, jackleg preachers, like you said, we don't know who they are. They can't discredit evidence. They see it. They see that there's resource going toward. There's a school in our community where children were being bullied for their odor. A councilman came to us and said, what can we do? I asked him, do you have any ideas? He said, we would like to put a laundromat in the school, but the school board won't finance it. Our church went to the board. We got the money. We bought the washers, the dryers. We connected with Whirlpool, and we put a laundromat in an empty classroom. And then they said Faith Alive did that. So the church, they began to trust us more and more, even from my parents' days, because of what they saw being accomplished. Then the community started to hear about it. From there, you would be surprised how many people are watching you from afar that want to sow into ministry. They want to, but they have misconceptions and they have these stereotypes that have been placed, but they can't deny evidence. When I went to see Dr. Lance Watson's church, when I was with Fred Hammond, it is evident that the ministry is doing great things. Number one, because of the excellence in presentation, the behavior of the people. There was such a healthy culture in that ministry. I wanted to attend. I said, if I lived in this state, I would come to this church just off the strength of what I felt when I came in the door. So when we develop a trust amongst the congregation, it expands to the community. From there, it goes to your cousin, your mom and them out of state. Everybody starts to hear about it. But I think oftentimes we take on this burden like we're all international voices, and everybody's not an international voice. If we can establish a strong foundation in the local church and we can get the community to buy into what we do, we can dispel these myths that every preacher is after your money.
I agree with that. They said leave the pound cake out of this, though. I just want to let you know that's what they said. I'm not saying that because I like that pound cake too. I'm just saying they said leave the pound cake out of here.
Well, he didn't say nothing about sweet potato pie.
Thank you. Just leave the sweet potato pie.
He didn't say nothing about sweet potato pie. So.
Amen. We got something to hold on to.
I think to come alongside what YPJ said, I think people need to see the pastors modeling giving. Oh, yeah. Like, so whether you're giving electronically or through an envelope, whatever the system is, now we cannot be caught asking and not giving, right? And I think that's part of it, whether it's in the community, whether it is paying for someone's meal with your card, not the church's credit card, right? Or asking people to there's some things needs that you have to send to the church. But I think people get buy-in just by seeing pastors being givers. Let me pay for your meal. Let me be a blessing to you. And not always trying to gain membership, right? I like the analogy that Jesus fed the 5,000 because they were hungry and never asked them to follow him. He fed them because they were hungry. Mm-hmm. And I think what we have to do, now YPJ just really rocked me when he said that everybody thinks they're international voice, because social media has made us feel that way, right? Because we got, but not even 1% of those people are going to ever come to our church building. But what I have seen is that if your church is leading a need, people will give to that, but they will not give on Sunday morning when you're just doing regular tithe and offering. So I think we have to model a culture of generosity amongst the leaders, and then people will hopefully buy into it.
Yeah, I want to tag team Dr. Bree with Pastor YPJ and Dr. Akeem to say a couple of things. First of all, historically, the leader of the Black church has been the freest person in the community. So from an adversarial point of view, it makes sense that adversaries of the Black community would attack that position, because that person is not dependent on the external society. They're being supported from within. So if I can parody that person, if I can undermine the trust that people have in that person, then it works to the advantage of those who oppose our community in general. So I think your point is well stated and needs to be underscored, that we are in a public relations battle where, and it has generational elements, because in my generation, we were trained that you should not talk about what you do. You just do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's not this generation. This generation assumes if you ain't talking about it, it's because you ain't doing it, know, which is kind of flip, But I believe that we're in a public relations battle where we have to promote starting, and you talked about process, and I thought about that as YPJ was talking. You start at Jerusalem promoting, and then go to Judea, go to Samaria, and then the uttermost parts will hear about it, but that credibility has to be built at those levels. One of the reasons I like talking about money is it forces you to be practical. So like a starting point, when I first came to St. Paul's, I wanted to have a good foundation. So about 3 years in, we ran into a financial crisis. Okay. And the crisis was from experiences that predated me. And I, prayed about it. I talked to our leadership about it. We decided to use the difficult experience to build for the future. So we adopted a practice of having an external independent audit every year of our finances. So think about the impact of that when we go to the bank, if we need money, we have 32 years of audited financials to show them. Banks may not understand Jesus, but they understand audited financial.
Right.
They can follow your financial trend, and all of that. So there's a sense in which our credibility requires us to engage some of these very practical tools, like having an audit and having our documents in order. Like, I believe when I was a young pastor, because you be radical, you be riding it, you be a maverick, I was like, I'm following the Bible. I don't need no bylaws. I don't need this. I don't need that. And let me tell you what an older preacher says. What I tell younger preachers now is, if it ain't written, it ain't real. Because if you ever run into trouble, if you ever end up in the court, The court wants to see only what is written.
Yeah.
Going in there and saying what the Lord led me to do. No. Were you authorized? Where's the written documentation? So I suggest to churches that they look at their foundational documents. And can I give them to you real quick? It won't take less than 30 seconds. That every church needs a constitution. It should be the hardest document in your organization to change because it fundamentally puts forth the identity of the organization. Built on the Constitution, you should have bylaws, which are a little easier to change, but they outline generally the operation of your organization. On top of the bylaws, you ought to have policies. And the policies say, in general, this is our perspective about remote work, about how we feel about these variety of issues. On top of the policies, you have procedures. And procedures are the easiest to change. They keep you relevant. They keep you current, right? So you almost never need to work your way all the way to the Constitution. But when you have your documents in order, it's easy for people to understand how you're put together, who is authorized to make what decisions. We started off doing just an audit of our financials. We've expanded that audit to an operational audit, where periodically we look at our documents and compare it to decisions that were made and whether those decisions were appropriate.
Yeah.
So the pastor doesn't have to say, you're not authorized to make that decision. The documents say it.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are some fights you never have to get into, if your documents are in order.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doctor, can I ask Dr. Watson a question? How often have you changed your bylaws, or what was the buy-in that you had to do to understand? Because most of the church's bylaws were written years and years when the church was started, and people don't understand the need for updates and things of the sort. So what was the buy-in that you had to get to do that, and how many times have you had to change or felt the need to change?
We have updated our bylaws across 35 years. We have updated our bylaws probably 5 times. And every 4 or 5 years, I will talk to my diaconate and I'll talk to my executive team about the need to review the bylaws to see if they are current and up to date in terms of how we're operating. And it's a process, back to your word, Bree, it's a process, and it usually, in our context, it's going to take about 18 months to do it. And that's intentional, because with our setup, in order to change a bylaw, you have to introduce it in one church conference, and it cannot be discussed until the next one. And that's to give people an opportunity to read it, to question it, and for you to build consensus about it as to why it needs to happen. And it's an amazing thing once the process is understood and embraced, because people have an opportunity to shape the church of which they are a part. Our bylaws delegate significant responsibilities to groups and to individuals, but it's clear cut, so that when you see it, there's a whole section, that says that the church does this through its pastor. The church does that through its executive council. The church does this through the diaconate, so that the congregation really only votes on an annual basis, on a regular annual basis. They only vote on 2 things. And one is to approve the budget, and the other is to accept the annual report. Now, there are 7 additional items that require a congregational vote if they come up. There are some that require what's called a supermajority. And believe it or not, it's not the boomers who necessarily get excited about seeing this. It's Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z.
Yeah.
Once they understand this thing is really put together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this ain't no fly by night. This ain't, Reverend Willie Wonder just trying to do something, but it's going to be around, and they see how they can plug in. It takes a while, but I think they deeply appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate
Can I
that.
say something real quick? That's really true, Dr. Watson, about Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. When they're presented with the structure of the ministry, they're impressed. Now, most of them still don't know what any of it means, but they're just so impressed by how it looks, and they'll inquire to a degree. But I have discovered those that have been a part of the bylaws even prior, before I was there, they're okay with it, again, because of consistency. I have found that consistency in work develops such a trust that it puts people on cruise control. They're like, I just trust you. So those that are coming in, every once in a while, you have questions that come up. But I think those of you that are watching this live right now, especially pastors, what Dr. Watson stated, and I appreciate Dr. Akeem asking him that, is information that people pay a lot of money to get. So you might not have really been listening to what was said, but I'm fortunate that my father and my mother, they were there before me, so they taught me all these things. And we haven't had to have a bylaw meeting in quite some time, and I'm not looking forward to another one, because when if everything, my thing is everything's going great, just keep going.
Keep going.
So, Dr. Bree, I think what's also important, we talk about generations, particularly when we talk about bylaws and constitutions and those good old-fashioned church meetings for churches that still have meetings. Oftentimes, the millennial generation and younger don't come to church meetings. And so it's left to the quote unquote powers that be. There was a case, I was talking to a church that's without a pastor, and one of the ladies who were on the pulpit committee said, we want a younger pastor, but the people that would appreciate a younger pastor don't come to the church meeting. So when they sat down and did the congregational profile and asked what they wanted, everybody in the meeting was 55 and older. So they going with 60 and married and yada yada yada. And so I just want to encourage those of us that are younger that participate in mainline traditional churches. I know it's a daunting task to do, and maybe I know now in COVID they're not happening. But when you hear of those meetings, particularly as Dr. Watson said, if you want to input in something to change something, many of us serve on committees at our jobs, have MBAs that can help the church. But if we do not come to meetings, we're uninformed, and the church oftentimes stays in a stagnant place when we could really offer help. I just wanted to throw that plug out there for those to be involved in church beyond just Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And Dr. Bree, it creates a context for conversations that are critical. You can't discuss these issues on a Sunday morning in worship, right? But you can discuss them in a church conference, where you can talk about the money and the dream and the process. I share with YPJ my gratitude for serving the people that God called me to. Our congregation has purchased 300 acres of land surrounding our Creighton campus. We're in the process we just completed a master plan.
300?
Yeah.
If LJ wasn't my friend, if your son was not my friend, I would be emailing you my resume after this call was over.
But this is something that will outlive me and outlive my service at the church. I'm just trying to get it in order because we're gonna build a master plan community.
No, I love it. I love master plan.
We're driving for 40% African American participation in the contracting. See how everything comes back to the money for me.
Yeah.
And look, and you were saying, like, how do you stay married, right? Here it is. This is what my father-in-law told me when I was trying to date his daughter. He said, romance without finance
Hello.
is a nuisance.
Hello.
So you
The church that says that, I like V-necks.
you get to have the money together, you know. And so we're working on a planned community, and what we've shared with people is we've been calling it possibility, because we hope that it'll become a model for churches and for Black people to reclaim part of their kinship to the land.
Yeah.
There was a time when we had a kinship for land, and we owned thousands upon thousands of acres of land until we were convinced that it wasn't worth anything, you know, and we gave it all up, and we ended up, you know, you can have the whole world, just give me Jesus. And that's exactly what happened. They took the whole world and gave us Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, and Jesus is worth having.
Yeah.
But even if you follow his model, you know, he was not just, oh, I give it to you. He was not just about pie in the sky, by and by, as you fly, once you die. He was talking about some sound on the ground by the pound that could be found while you still around.
I love it.
Bars.
I love it. Right. It's gonna be like a cipher, right? No, I love it. I love it, especially master plan communities. That's so beautiful. And you know, I said PJ Morton seemed to be writing the song to the revolution, you know, buy back the block. If I don't own it, I don't want it. You know what I mean? And that's how I operate in business. If I can't own it, I don't need any part of it, because I really can't control how it impacts my community. One reason that I knew this data would be important was because we can't go to banks with anecdotal evidence. Everybody else has some kind of data. When they're looking for grants, they have data to back up, you know, the impact of the Black church or what the needs are. And we just didn't have it when we lacked data. I will never forget, you know, we talk about generosity, and I usually try to set an example for giving, you know, at my church, that I give of my services. So the same thing that I do for my clients, I do for my church for free, because it's my reasonable service, right? I don't get to participate like most young adults because I'm usually not in town. And I try to give generously so that people, you know, generosity breeds generosity. When I realized that was true, I remember at the last church I served, I did something. We had service month was my month to plan. And back then there was a song out called Rack City. So I did Rack City was the name of our month, random acts of kindness in my city. So we were doing everything from giving people, like we would bless them by paying for their groceries or their food or whatever. We would give them a card. Of course, it was more guerrilla marketing. So we didn't say, thanks, we're from Friendship West. You had to kind of Google this site and see what we were up to. And that was something that people would post on social media. Guess what? Somebody just paid for my groceries and did this. Well, it was all leading up to something. We were remodeling the home of senior citizens who had served our church for an extended period of time. And we did something called Dollar Sundays. When I wanted to do Dollar Sundays, the pastor of stewardship said, no, we got to do $10 Sundays. I said, no, you do Dollar Sundays. If you ask them for one and they have 10, they give it to you. If you ask them for 10, they have 5, they give you nothing. We need to make sure we can, I really got it from Barack Obama, because I was bragging all the time, right? I'm like, Mama, I done gave Barack some more money. She was like, well, how much you give him if you keep, I was like, oh, $3 every time he asks, don't worry about it. But it was micro giving, right? This is how he won. And so we did this campaign, and we would get $100 bills. Every Sunday we would have about $11,000 to $14,000 a week to continue to help to remodel the senior citizens' home. Erykah Badu came to church, and she's like, oh my gosh, I love that you guys are doing this giving, because every day of the month for Rack City, you had something you were supposed to do, call and rekindle a relationship with someone that, you know, you need to forgive. I mean, it was just something that kind of took over that month. And so it was so much generosity happening throughout the month that it was revolutionary. The reason Friendship West has a credit union today is because they decided to do a micro giving campaign after seeing Service Month happen. Service Month happened. We had Dollar Sundays. We realized micro giving worked. We started to have different levels of giving, right? Tithing is where you want to get to. But in the meantime, can you give at least this small amount, then go to this, then work your way up to 10%? This is how you calculate 10%. We need to remember that you have to tell people how to calculate 10%, net, gross, all those things are issues. And then by that time, we had enough money in the bank to start to do microloans. Well, there was a church in the city who was having issues with their credit union, and they were possibly going to lose it. There was enough money in the bank from micro giving for them to build a partnership and save that credit union in the Black community. That helped to shut down the payday loan company on the corner by the church.
Wow.
And they could come to the church for micro giving loans and not be taken advantage of. These are things we have to remember when we're talking about generational help and generational work. I knew seniors were not able to remodel their home. You know, they get older, they need ramps, they need all these kind of things. What can I do with my young brain, right? I didn't know what other people, I didn't know anything about, you know, whatever you need to do to remodel a house. You know, I didn't know anything about what you had to clear in the finances. That was over in accounting. All I knew is I knew how to breed generosity. I knew what it meant to take over a city. I knew what it meant to theme a program so that people wanted to be a part of it. And it was intergenerational work at its best. And so I want us to remember there is no area we can't deep dive into when we're willing to use everyone. Money becomes much less scary and much more transparent when everyone is involved in the process. Everything becomes up for grabs and victories, right? So sometimes we want to do things and we want to have everybody in the room. Everybody's not always able to be in the room, but the least you can do is create a board that is intergenerational, where everyone can feel like their voice is counted. Voice and value matters so much. Nobody wants to be a notch on someone's belt. No one wants to think that their participation isn't necessary or their voice won't be considered. So I encourage everyone to do intergenerational work. Of course, this is always a prelude to a webinar on generations where we're going to share data that we've mined to see where generations are in a number of areas. Do I want you to come to the webinar? Absolutely so. Do I want you to rewatch this? Do I want you to share it with a friend? Do I want you to, while you're dreaming your big dreams, take some notes? That's what I want you to do. I have a reasonable service to give as Black Millennial Cafe, because while we talk about the support of people, I am nothing without Black church leaders, Black church pastors, Black church congregants, and most importantly, STVU. Black Millennial Cafe was birthed out of my work, and it was supported by Virginia Union School of Theology. And so I realize I have a reasonable service to give. So it is my prayer that you will take this seriously, that you will take notes, that you'll go back through it again, that you'll share it with somebody, because there was so much information given. This could have totally been a master class. And I hope this helps you do the work that God has called you to do. And so I want you guys to go ahead and give a quick goodbye. This is my goodbye, and then I'm going to let them say their parting words, how you can reach them, how you can support them, whatever it is they want to say. But thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate it. For the people who sent DMs or messages in my inbox, like, why aren't there any women on it? Don't worry. Give me until next Thursday. We'll have a conversation among women to have this discussion about generations, and we'll also bring in data we have on women in ministry. So don't trip, chocolate chip. I didn't forget women. I didn't forget women. I'm a woman. It's coming, but I thought it was important to do this conversation like that. We're also going to do a conversation with boomers alone to talk about the data we've seen with boomers and what we can do to begin to do some healing and intergenerational work among boomers and younger generations. So thank you guys so much. Go ahead and give us your closing words.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Bree, for being on. I want to thank you, Dr. Hakeem and Pastor YPJ, for sharing this moment. It has been informative and provocative and thought-evoking for me. So I appreciate this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing more from Black Millennial Cafe.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part. As Dr. Hakeem said, you've been my boss for so many years, Dr. Bree, and you've ran my life. So I just appreciate you allowing me to serve you yet again, my queen. And Dr. Watson, sir, again, it's always an honor just to be in your company. Dr. Kim, I appreciate everything that you stated on this evening. And everybody watching, it's been a great time. I've learned a lot.
It's been a great time to Dr. Watson. It feels weird, man, but you the OG. You the real OG, man. Like we got to share space. I just got one question. Are we having Fire on Fridays in 2021, or is it virtual, or
we might have Fire on a Friday?
Okay, I just need it. I'm going through withdrawals over here, man. Like I need it. But to YPJ, thank you. I'm just here so I won't get fined or fired by Reverend Dr. Bree. But it's been an amazing conversation, much needed. Thank you, sis, for trusting us with this space, and we look forward for how Black Learning Cafe keeps moving the goalposts and stretching us. Thank you.
Thank you. I forgot to say this one thing. Please go to our website. We have job openings and we're hiring an executive, our first executive full-time at the end of the year. So if you're looking for work, we have, I think, copywriter, social media, human resource specialist, all those things. So check us out. We have a new website, irunbmc.com. We have free resources that are coming out. We're opening up an assessment store so that you can have your own assessments and surveys to go ahead and see what's happening within your own ministries. We're really excited about the future. And I'm going to stop being his fake boss, and we're hiring Dr. Walker to come in and do projects for us. So we're really excited about the future. Thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget to share it. Go ahead and send it to 73,000 people before the night ends, okay? See you soon.